What's causing the rise in book banning? On my podcast, Velshi Banned Book Club, I speak with authors of banned books to try and find out.
I think what they're really objecting to is that a young person has perceived the hypocrisy and corruption of the generation that has created their world.
This book saved me in a lot of ways, and then I published it hoping to help people find a blueprint to heal.
Season 2 of Velshi Banned Book Club. Listen now, wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Burn This Book, a podcast where we, Nicole and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. This week's book is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, which was published in 1969.
This book is the first in a seven-volume autobiographical series of Maya Angelou's life. This book specifically covers the early years of Maya's life from when she was 3 years old, abandoned by her parents to live with her grandmother, who Maya and her brother Bailey called Mama. And they live in Stamps, Arkansas. And this book ends in California when she becomes a mother at 16 years old. Yeah, that's like a basic synopsis. In terms of like what happens in the book, it talks about what life was like in the South in the 1930s, seeing the overt racism of her white neighbors and the subconscious prejudice woven into the threads of everyday life. It also addresses the sexual abuse and rape of Maya by her mother's boyfriend, which is probably why this book is banned. Mm-hmm. And also the subsequent healing that came from books and from finding her voice within the pages she read. And then from there, her grandmother sent Maya and her brother to California, where she went to high school, did a lot of odd jobs, was homeless, and then eventually gave birth to her son, which I didn't realize this was a series.
Yeah.
So when it ended with the birth of her son, I was like, oh, what an interesting place to end your autobiography, Maya.
I know. I don't think a lot of people read it knowing that it is part of a series. I think because it was required reading in my high school. And I think people were just like, yep, that was it. And it was an important book because it talked about growing up in the Jim Crow South. And so I feel like a lot of people are like, wow, what an amazing book. And then they just like wrap it at the end. And they don't realize that, yeah, this is just the beginning of Maya telling her entire life story. So this is just her childhood. And then she goes into her 20s and she does her 30s and her 40s and her 50s. I had the honor and pleasure of reading all of them 2 years ago in order.
Wow.
And it was like one of the most comforting. It became like almost like scripture in that I feel like I can reread any of these books of hers and I will get something new about it and I will know more about myself and I will feel more empowered every single time, even though I don't share her experiences. Just like the things that she talks about is just, it's a balm to my soul. If you're depressed, I highly recommend reading Maya Angelou, and especially I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It's so good. When was the first time you read it, Eden?
This is my first time reading it.
What? What were your initial reactions or feelings about it?
I loved it. I really loved it. I thought it was quite beautiful. The rape was very heartbreaking, and I thought it was really enlightening listening to her thoughts as a child of what she was thinking about. She thought she was in the wrong. She knew something was weird or off. Like me being a parent reading that part, I felt like it was important for like eventually high school age, right? For my child to read something like this, because I imagine like if this were to happen, similar thoughts would go through their head. And being able to see the perspective of someone who has gone through something horrific like that, being able to understand the point of view from the victim's point of view. I also love her relationship with her brother, Bailey.
Yeah.
Where just like everything she did, she wanted to do for Bailey and like to please him. And
Yeah.
Just really sweet.
It was, yeah, I remember the first time I read it, I like the main character I walked away thinking about was this woman named Mrs. Flowers. So after Maya goes through being raped, the case goes to court and she tells people what happened. And they ask her, they're like, is this the first time he's touched you? And she lies. And she says it is the first time because she doesn't understand the implications. It was very confusing and stressful for her. The man who raped her eventually is murdered, who we are led to believe probably by Maya's mother's brothers. They were kind of thugs and taking things into their own hands. Maya understood as a little girl that he died because she lied. And so she spends the rest of like the next few years in absolute silence, except for to her brother Bailey. She doesn't want to talk because she feels like her words are too powerful, that she might kill somebody else. Still not understanding or being able to balance the weight of having been abused versus, her confessing like that. None of that means anything to this little girl's brain. And so she stops talking and her mother sends her back to Stamps, Arkansas. She was in St. Louis for a little bit to live with her grandmother because that might be a better place for her. Maya just doesn't speak to anybody except for her brother Bailey, and everyone just has like accepted that something bad happened and she doesn't talk anymore. She can, but she doesn't. And finally, this woman from the community named Mrs. Flowers comes and invites Maya to drop off groceries to her and do things like that. And she starts to read to Maya and starts encouraging Maya to read to her. And it completely opens up this whole new world of poetry and the beauty of words and the dignity of being a human being. And Mrs. Flowers, like, she didn't have to do that, but she saw a little girl that was hurting and she went out of her way to just give that girl attention in a really beautiful way. And I think about that, about who have been Mrs. Flowers to me, and have I ever been a Mrs. Flowers to anybody? I don't think I have been. I would love, that is something I would like to aspire towards though. But that like whole thing, that was like the biggest thing I got from my first reading of it. I didn't really remember anything else. Was Mrs. Flowers encouraged her to start speaking again. And so you keep getting this like metaphor of this caged bird, and she's now finally starting to sing or speak. And then she graduates elementary school, I think. And the people that come and speak at this school are just like truly showing that being Black and going to school is worthless because you're just going to have the same roles that your parents have had or your grandparents have had. And she's sitting there, Maya is feeling like, why did we even do this? I feel so small. I'm so angry and so like just very, very angry, very valid. And then the whole crowd, once those speakers leave, starts singing the African American national anthem. And that was another moment when Maya started singing. And you see that same theme of this caged bird singing, and it brought back that dignity and that pride and sense of community and sense of resilience back. And so we keep seeing that happening over and over again in this story of like her being knocked down in pretty intense ways. And then there's a moment where her voice actually does matter and creates healing. And it's just like incredible. And eventually you see why they moved to California is because it's too dangerous for Bailey to live in Stamps, Arkansas anymore because of the lynchings that are happening. And so they moved to California, and her dad is kind of a loser, to be honest. He just kind of says what he wants and he doesn't do anything. And then, but once again, it's this idea that she is caged by the norms of society and the prejudices, but it doesn't silence her. And that is like, so the first time I read it, it was just Mrs. Flowers all day for me. And then the second time I read it, I was like, oh, this is part of a whole series. I love that. And then this time I read it and I was like, wow, she is resilient. And I'm like obsessed with her mother, her mother dear, who is just so strong and beautiful and interesting and allows Maya to be her own person. And I just love every character in the book. It was almost written like a fiction, right? Because the characters were so well developed.
Yeah, you said a couple things there. And actually, I was reading about why she chose I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, two things. So there was like a discussion on this book and the later books as well. And it said, although singing is more developed in Angelou's later books, she hints at the possibility of joyful song in Caged Bird. And I love how you mentioned that it's kind of like scriptures, because the singing, like she didn't talk about how I know why the caged bird squawks or like chirps. Singing kind of lends more to like a spiritual communion with one another of singing together in harmony and all of that. And the title of the book comes from the third stanza of Lawrence Dunbar's poem Sympathy. And it says, I know why the caged bird sings, ah me, when his wing is bruised and his bosom.
I love when you read poetry, Eden.
His bosom sore. And his bosom sore. When he beats his bars and would be free, it is not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core, but a plea that upward to heaven he flings. I know why the caged bird sings. Leading to, like, linking back to that spiritual, that scriptural feeling of just I'm just reading this, the little thing on the back of my book James Baldwin wrote.
Oh, read it.
It says, her portrait is a biblical study of life in the midst of death. And I think it's just is all connected. Just finding hope. Finding rainbows in the clouds. I saw an interview of her saying that, where her life has had a lot of clouds, but she's also had plenty of rainbows too.
I love that. I think it's also really cool that James Baldwin wrote the review, whatever, the praise for that book, because it was because of James Baldwin that Maya decided to write these books. We know her as like this author, this amazing activist, this thinker, this poet, all of these things. She didn't actually start writing until her 40s and 50s, which is incredible. And she didn't publish this book and the whole series until later in her life. And it was after James Baldwin was like, you should write your story and make it a literary work. And which also tells you, like, we don't exist in a vacuum. We need friends and community. And to have one of the greatest writers of all time turn to you and be like, your writing matters, would be really humbling and very scary if I was Maya. Because I'd be like, I do Broadway. I organize. I'm a community organizer. I don't know. But I feel like there's a sense of personhood within her, and I feel that in all of her writing, and that she knew that her story did matter. And I kind of feel like, how would we move about this earth if we really did believe our stories and each other's stories actually mattered? I think that would be, I think that we would speak differently to each other.
Yeah.
And about ourselves, I think.
Definitely. Going back to Mrs. Flowers.
Yes.
Because that was so I listened to this on audiobook, but I actually pulled my book off the shelf for this part that Mrs. Flowers, something she said. So this is when Maya goes over and is running errands for Mrs. Flowers and reading with her. She said, as I ate, she began the first of what we later called my lessons in living. She said that I must always be intolerant of ignorance, but understanding of illiteracy. That some people, unable to go to school, were more educated and even more intelligent than college professors. A life lesson, essentially. Lessons in living. And I also think, like, that really resonated with me, especially in terms of what we're doing with this podcast. In hopes of, like, bringing literacy to people lacking in that.
Yeah.
Like literacy is an understanding of why these stories matter, and you can't take things out of context
Hmm.
just because you don't agree with one thing. You gotta see it as a whole.
Yeah. I also think that idea you can't be tolerant of ignorance. Wait, what's the quote again? Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, I must always be intolerant of ignorance,
And then what about literacy and understanding?
but understanding of illiteracy. Yep.
Illiteracy, yeah. I think it's interesting because I do feel like ignorance is more of a choice than illiteracy. Illiteracy has a lot to do with opportunity and privilege and the opportunity to go to school or
Mhm.
ability to do those things or to grapple with these different ideas. Whereas ignorance does feel like a choice, especially right now where people are like, I don't want to
Yeah.
learn that, so I'm not going to. And
Uh-huh.
therefore I'm going to make sure no one else learns it. I liked
Yeah.
at the end of the book, Maya's back with her mother in California, and her mother is, I think she married to this guy named Clydell, and Maya calls him Daddy Clydell, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm nervous that I got that name wrong now. Oh, now I'm all panicking. But it was cool because she kind of, we bring back that idea. He didn't get to have the education or the schooling that Maya's had or that Maya's mother's had. But he was not an ignorant man, and she made that very clear. And he never felt shame about it. He was just a good person. And I think it was interesting because it felt like the book went full circle with that idea. With
Mm-hmm.
she was abused by her mother's boyfriend at the time at the beginning of the book. And then her mother's new partner was an amazing person and became like her real only father figure. And he was the
Mm-hmm.
one that stepped in when when Maya finally decided, like in her 8th month of pregnancy, that she was to tell her parents that she was pregnant.
Yeah.
And they were like, "You're doing 3 weeks." And Daddy Clydell spoke to her and like helped calm her down. He was like, "Since the dawn of time, since Eve ate that apple, people have been getting pregnant and it's been just fine. You're going to do great." Like it was interesting to see those relationships healed. And and you can recognize Maya's nuance with all of these people and the ability to see
Mhm.
herself with nuance also, which is also just an aspect of literacy too. And I appreciated the ability to breathe throughout this book. Maya went through a lot of
Mhm.
hard things and she kept letting us breathe through the lessons. And then she would give us a break of something that was really funny and bizarre.
Mhm.
Like she thought she was a lesbian for a long time and it was really stressful for her.
Yeah.
And walking through her talking to her mom about it, and it was just her going through puberty.
Yeah.
And there were like other little things that were like, what? Maya. And in the middle of and she went to Mexico with her dad, and while she was there, he got so drunk that she had to drive back. She didn't know how to drive, and she was like, what is happening? Her
Mhm.
dad just was so irresponsible about the whole thing, and Maya walks away being like, I just drove a car through the mountains of Mexico. No one can tell me anything at this point. This is
Yeah.
ridiculous. And you walked away feeling more empowered instead of feeling like, her life is horrible. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how she did that so well, because I do feel like a lot of books are like, this was awful. I have
Mhm.
trauma, which is fair, but this just it turned it maybe it was because of the time. Maya wrote it 30 years later, 40 years later, to be able to be like, this is what I've learned, and that's more of the light that's on it. I don't know, but
Yeah, having more of a life experience to shine a light on it all and have it in context of her life.
yeah, I loved it. Just
Yeah,
loved
it was great.
man. What was your favorite part of the book, would you say?
I would also say Mrs. Flowers is pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything about her was pretty amazing. I did also laugh at her her growing leg hair and armpit hair is like, well, I see lesbians who have hairy legs and hairy armpits, so I guess I'm a lesbian.
And I don't know how to talk about it. And you can tell that she it wasn't like I am this scary thing. It was just like, I don't understand this.
Mhm.
this is so confusing.
Yeah. So I watched like there's a 1-minute clip of Maya talking with Oprah.
Mm-hmm. Was this when they went back to stamps? Because there's an episode of Oprah where they went back to stamps, and it had been the first time Maya went. Oh, not that one. That's a great one.
I don't know. Yeah, it literally was just a 1-minute clip.
Okay.
I couldn't find like any other ones. But yeah, Maya was disagreeing with a review of her book that said that you can never go back home, like, because it'll never be the same or whatever. Because she said, my belief is that you can never leave home. You take it with you everywhere you go. My past is my present. And Oprah adds, and everything that has happened in your past is what makes you who you are right this moment. And so I think like she talks about it in context of like her writing this book and like trying to write the truth and write it eloquently. So I don't know if that doesn't really answer your question of like how she was able to write so beautifully and like without the heaviness of trauma just like overbearing the whole book. But yeah, maybe it is just that wisdom of like oh, this is just who I am. This is just part of me. This isn't a thing that defined me. This is a thing that happened.
Yeah. And on that thought, sorry, I almost interrupted you. I apologize.
Oh, you're good.
She wrote in such a direct manner. Like it was, and comparing this to Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, this was so opposite of that. Like there was absolutely no, I'm not gonna say there was no prose, but it was just so direct.
Yeah.
And it was so, this is what happened.
Like matter of fact.
Yeah. And it reminded me almost of like Ernest Hemingway in that like it felt like she didn't use more words than were needed. But it still comes off as poetic. And that's what I don't understand. When it was first released, a lot of people were like, this is ridiculous. This book uses so many euphemisms. And someone, Francine Prose, a author, called the book a survival memoir and decided that it was partly responsible for dumbing down American society because it is manipulative melodrama. And she calls like Maya's writing as like poor and all of these other things. But then on the other side, you had all these other reviewers who were like, this is the best autobiography I've ever read. This is like one of the most incredible thing. It's full of truth in simple, forthright terms. It's the most honest book and things like that. So it's like, I wonder what she was going through reading all these reviews, if she took it personally or if she was just beyond that.
Yeah.
I'm so curious because they're so on the opposite sides. Like nothing is in the middle about her book.
Yeah. And I wonder if like, her having a career already or like experience already in poetry and playwriting, she's like, whatever.
Yeah, maybe. But this has been called in the 90s after I think she read a poem of hers at Clinton's inauguration. I want to say. I'm gonna fact check that, but I'm pretty sure she did, and that like brought people back to like, wow, Maya Angelou is amazing. And suppose like it looks like her book sales went like increased by like 300% after she wrote her poem. So in the 90s, around that time, an educator who wrote this book called Stories of Resilience in Childhood used a caged bird as one of the case studies and talked about how it is like one of the best examples of resiliency for a child to read. And it's like one of those most like effective tools for providing real life examples. The psychological concepts of like effects of abuse, parenting styles, sibling and friendship relations, gender issues, cognitive development, puberty, identity formation. And so like, for me, reading it as a kid, I just remember feeling like, wow, there's got to be a lot of trauma in this school because there's a lot of kids that are odd. But that's where I put, you know, and I don't know if that's wrong or right, but that was definitely where like 13-year-old Nicole's head was in the conversation of, or I must have been 14, 15-year-old Nicole's head was in the conversation of reading this for school and being like, and then looking around the world.
Yeah. I love that though. Like it opened the world to you. Like it made you think outside of yourself, your world, your school. Which is, I think, is like a beautiful thing that books do. Yeah.
It also gave me heroes like her mother and her grandmother. And I looked at Uncle Willie differently. Her uncle lives with her grandmother in Stamps, Arkansas, and he has a visible disability, and I think he had polio. Was that it?
So.
As a child, and as a 15-year-old, I remember being a kid in high school with a visible disability where I couldn't straighten either of my arms. They were both locked at like 90-degree angles for a lot of my high school years, and because of my rheumatoid arthritis. And I just remember like really feeling like seen in a lot of these pages, which is a wild thing for a white girl from Colorado suburbia to say. But like if it's a true story, its messages will be universal without discrediting the obvious impact it has on the civil rights movement and in talking about American history. But Maya gives me heroes. I love, like, if every time I'm depressed or anxious, reading Maya Angelou is the biggest balm to remembering my own resiliency and my own strength. Like, truly.
Yeah.
I love her.
Yeah.
I'm going to start crying. Do you love her, Eden? Do you love her?
Yeah, she's
Are you going to read
great.
the rest of her books?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I think so beautiful that was required reading for your high school.
Yeah. We were really lucky.
Yeah, to teach kids in high school what resilience looks like.
Yeah.
Especially from suburbia where there isn't like too much hardship relatively.
No,
you know,
in comparison to being Black in the Jim Crow South. Absolutely.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, I can't even hold a candle. And like, I also don't think I would be receptive to understanding those experiences if it weren't for these authors like Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison, who give me that peak, and those teachers who encouraged us to read them at younger ages, where I didn't feel like I had to be defensive at all. There was none of that kind of energy in any of it.
Yeah.
It was just, let's read Maya's experiences in this different experience than yours. Yeah.
I think also like this makes me think of that children's picture book on sex education and like the girl bringing the book to her mother and telling her like, oh, this abuse section is about me.
Yeah.
I think this opens up that opportunity for people who have gone through like, amazing that we read this in high school, because like, what if a student wasn't able to talk about this to anyone and just be able to like bring that up to a teacher or a trusted adult to talk about it, and like it gives them Maya finding her voice gives other students a voice. I mean, I'm just projecting, but
no, I think you're right though. I mean, all the feelings that she shared during that relationship with her mom's boyfriend as a young girl, like the feelings of wanting to be wanted by a father figure and wanting to be loved and cuddled and all those confusing feelings in the midst of the abuse, and then not understanding why it has to be secretive and all these things. Like, I just think that I am confident that there are people who have experienced those conflicting emotions and haven't known how to talk about it. Or have felt like they are partly to blame because they did have those desires to be close to that person, you know? I think it can be an amazing mirror if people are given the opportunity to read it, like you said.
Definitely.
I don't have any other thoughts about it other than I just really
Me
recommend
neither.
reading it.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, like, similar to how the book is written, it's like a pretty straightforward episode.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is it. This is what happened. This is how we feel.
Mm-hmm. Something cool too is it being published in 1969. That was, the middle beginning, like the civil rights movement had been happening. Martin Luther King had just been assassinated, and we're kind of moving into a Black Power moment. And I feel like this book would probably serve so much of that. You see a lot of Maya shares the rhetoric that was shared by a lot of leaders at that time about, she's so direct about it and then brings it back into this idea of my people are beautiful and we are deserving. And she continues to bring it back. And I think reading it with that context, it's cool to imagine her contributing to that through just telling her own story. Yeah, like just telling your own story is an act of activism is what we're seeing from this as well.
Definitely. Call back to George M. Johnson.
Call back.
Right? Yeah.
Call back to them.
The first person you're an activist for is yourself.
Yeah. It's pretty good.
Pretty good. So, any guesses to why it's banned?
It has a lot of pro-Black dignity rhetoric. I could see why people being upset about that. The rape stuff. Also her exploring her sexuality at the end of the book. Yeah, that's why I think. It's critical of religion, which is ironic because it's not ironic. It's just interesting because throughout the rest of the books, Maya is very devout in her spirituality. But this is like, it's not critical. It's just telling the stories of her going to church as a young girl and how bizarre it was sometimes.
Which, as a young child, sometimes it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everything
even
is
as an
bizarre.
adult,
Even as an adult. Honestly, any room can get bizarre real fast.
So yeah, it was banned due to its depiction of the molestation of an 8-year-old, the abuse of said child, and an instance of teen pregnancy. One instance, because that has never happened before.
No.
I do want to call out this one thing. Okay, so in Fairfax, Virginia, it claimed it encouraged profanity and was filled with descriptions of drug abuse, sexually explicit conduct, and torture. And they succeeded in having her book banned from a Virginia school district. Yeah, and then book banners in Alabama asked that the book be rejected because, they said, it preached bitterness and hatred against whites.
Right, yeah, that's...
And then in Maryland, it was removed from the local high school reading list because protesters said it was likely to corrupt minors.
What? Into doing what?
Yeah, I have no idea. Yeah, I will call out. So it said it contains child molestation scenes, lesbian scenes, teen sex scenes, and teen pregnancy scenes. And these are not matters for children in middle school or any elementary school, which I would agree, but I don't think they're being read there.
No, I feel like there were times when we would read like excerpts in middle school or, but we would never read the whole thing. We only read the whole book in high school. So, like, I don't know a teacher that would be like, yes.
Yes, first grade, kindergarten. Yeah. Welcome to school. We're reading this book.
It wouldn't even make sense to the kid.
They wouldn't know what's going on.
No.
Well,
I loved it.
Me too.
Freaking
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. Everyone should read it.
Yeah. Speaking of ratings, please rate our podcast and subscribe to our podcast.
Yes, please.
Give us 5 stars. It keeps us on Apple's radar.
Yay.
And yeah. Our next book. Yeah. And our next book is Bridge to Terabithia by Catherine Patterson.
Mhm.
It'll be both our first times reading it.
Absolutely. Very, very excited. We missed that whole. We just missed that somehow.
Somehow we missed it, yeah.
Somehow. But yeah, check it out from the library or purchase it from your local bookstore or our bookshop page. Link in bio.
There you go.
And join us in 2 Wednesdays for the discussion.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Okay.
Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicola Corin and Eden Wen.
Music by myself, Nicole, and performed by my dad, Frank.